what if it's not one tree, but it's more like a type of tree, or let's say a tree population that has a particular meaning? And the reason I think that that's interesting is because this word betoch that keeps appearing in connection with it, if you go to the first use of the word betoch, which is usually translated as in the midst of, what's interesting is that it comes right at the beginning of Maseh Bereshit in the 7 days of creation. Vayomer Elohim yehi rakia betoch hamayim, vayhi mavdil bein mayim lamayim. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, let there be a rakia, like a firmament, in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. So from the perspective of this pasuk, betoch is about being a boundary. It's about being in the midst, but really being like the midline of something. That you are dividing between, in this case, the water that's up in the sky and the water that's down below. And that actually bears out in other places. So for example, the same root, when we have the Brit Ben Abetarim, when Avraham is slicing all these animals into halves, there's this word tawech, which is the same word as toch, basically. There's this description of batawech, that these animals that are being split in half are being placed batawech. And so maybe you could say, okay, betoch maybe doesn't always exactly mean a midline, but in this case, I think it's very reasonable to say that the trees betoch hagan, what betoch hagan may really mean is sort of down the middle of the garden, like that it's dividing the gan into different kinds of trees. And implicitly, what that may mean really is that there's a gray area at the boundary that we really have to, make the focus of the story. Because we've also been told there's this kind of tree called Etz HaChaim. Like, is it one tree, or is it, again, a species of tree? And no one says there's Etz HaMavet, but we're told about Etz Torah. Maybe this is kind of is like an Etz Mavet, because you're going to die if you eat it, but then they eat it and they don't die. So then that seems like that wasn't true. And that becomes confusing or puzzling. But if you really say, if you really look at what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is what I want. This is what I want to argue from that. Biyom achalchem mimenu is the phrase, right? That ki yod. Sorry, I was about to quote the Nachash, but I want to read the original one from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. U'me'etz hada'at tov ve'ra lo tochal mimenu ki biyom achalcha mimenu mot tamut. So this is for the day that you eat of it, you will surely die, is how we often translate this. But I would argue you could as easily translate it, on a day you are eating from it, you will surely die. Meaning, like, at some point, if you're eating from it, you'll die. And that doesn't necessarily mean bolt of lightning the instant you eat from it. It could also mean, if you make it your practice to be eating from this fruit, then one day, while you're eating from it, you're going to die. And that's an interesting thing, especially in connection with the idea of the Nachash. Because what's a Nachash? Not just when we think about, zoology, but also specifically in the idea of the Torah, in the idea of Razal, the Nachash is the danger that you don't see, that jumps up and bites you and kills you when you least expect it, right? And it's there at the tree, which is underlining this idea that there's something kind of, you're going into a danger zone where things could actually catch you by surprise and be deadly, but maybe you're sometimes you're okay. You can walk through a field full of snakes and be fine, and not even know they're there, in fact. And this is even just in the pasuk at the end of the story, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was talking to the snake, he says, "Uyishuv charosh ve'atat shufeno akev," like he will strike at your head and you'll strike at his heel. So the idea of the snake striking at your heel is there already. So the thing, just to pull these things all together now, what I want to argue is this, basically, the idea of Etz Chaim is you eat that tree, it's mutar, it's permitted to you, you're not going to die, because fundamentally what the Torah is trying to do here is draw a connection between sin and death, right? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu will punish you for your transgressions. And the transgression here in fruit world, in this language that's all about which fruits are permitted and forbidden, there are fruits that you can just eat because they are mutar, and there's no problem. They're permitted to you. This isn't complicated. If you stay in that part of the gan and just eat those fruits, you can live forever because you won't be capable of doing anything wrong. There will be nothing that you can do that is forbidden to you. And that's associated now also with this idea of, and they were naked, but they were unashamed, like they were not aware of, or they weren't their eyes weren't open to the possibility of doing the things that are forbidden, that are associated with nudity as well. And that's why this whole thing marches in lockstep, and the development of sexuality parallels what's going on with the food. So we have the Etz Chaim place, that part of the gan, and then betoch hagan, in the midst of the gan, we have Etz Da'at Tovera, which is about, I know what's good and what's bad, right? I'll go there and I'll be in this gray area, and there will be some fruits and trees and things that maybe I have to make decisions about, but I'll figure out what's okay and what isn't, because maybe I'm actually capable of knowing what's best, right? And what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying is, look, you're already walking towards the part of the gan that's full of poisonous trees, so to speak, right? The part that we don't need to really bother with, because no one wants to eat poisonous trees that make you drop dead the moment you eat from them. And so there was no temptation to eat from that. But implicitly, that's kind of there on the other side of this boundary. So no one's going to go charging through the boundary and do things that are so forbidden that the sin is its own punishment, right? It's wrong to eat something that will cause you to drop dead that instant, and the punishment for that is you drop dead that instant. That's not up for discussion, because that's not the hard part. People just avoid that. But then there's this border region where it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu saying, okay, if you're on the borderline, then maybe you actually can navigate this to some degree, but if you hang out there all the time, if you're eating there all the time, you're going to make mistakes. And this is already a place where you can make the wrong choice. You can eat from a tree that is not so permitted. And indeed, that's the world that we live in now, right? That's life. Life exists in this boundary region, practically speaking, where we have all these choices to make. We have desires. We have things that are permitted to us. We try to figure out what's permitted to us and what isn't. And we face struggles sometimes over, how to make that decision correctly, and we make mistakes. And there also is the, danger in the midst of that. We expect that life partly consists of snakes that jump up and get you when you don't expect them. And so this condition of Etz Da'at Tovera being betoch hagan, I think the point is that it's about the desire that the human being will have to expand the territory of trees that he can eat from into the hard cases, and that there's danger associated with that because you don't know when you're going to make a mistake. And of course, concomitantly, there's also all of this emergence of the idea of sexuality when they're eating from this fruit in this region, because obviously human sexuality is very much that kind of a danger zone, where on the one hand, there are things that are gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that are permitted still in that territory, but there also are things that are totally asur. And you can't simply follow the animal maxim of figure out what you desire and then see if you can get it. And if you can get it, then have it. You need to have a Torah to help you navigate that and to figure it out. And I've argued before, I'm not sure that from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective, this was some kind of misfire or calamity. The reading of his statement, pen yishlach yado, lest he reach out his hand and velakach, and take from me'etz ha'chaim, v'chai le'olam, it may be indeed that he, in a sense, allows us to become the ones who are a bit more yodeh tov v'ra, because he doesn't want us to just stay in the safe part of the garden and live forever eating from the nice permitted fruits, because that won't enable us to grow and develop and really turn into beings that can serve him properly. And so it's not necessarily entirely the case that we should view the development of this new relationship to the trees and the fruits as a problem, but it certainly is a complex one and a fraught one and a dangerous one that requires guidance from Hashem of how to not get bitten by the snake, so to speak, or not to eat the poison fruit by mistake, or however you want to look at it. And that applies to fruits, and applies to land and property, and to sexuality, and all the other basic building blocks of the world that we inhabit, and to which all of which that the Torah applies to. And so, just in closing, I want to read from a Gemara it's Sanhedrin, Masechet Sanhedrin, Amud Ayin Hey, and sorry, Daf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph. So Sanhedrin 75a. So the case is discussed, and I'll do this in English to do it rapidly. The case is discussed, a certain incident involving a man who set his eyes upon a certain woman, and passion rose in his heart to the point that he became deathly ill. And they came and asked doctors what was to be done with him. And the doctor said, he will have no cure until she engages in sexual intercourse with him. The sages said, let him die, and she may not engage in intercourse with him. The doctor said, she should at least stand naked before him. The sages said, let him die, and she may not stand naked before him. The doctor suggested, the woman should at least converse with him behind a fence in a secluded area, so that he should derive a small amount of pleasure from the encounter. The sages insisted, let him die, and she may not converse with him behind a fence. And then there's a subsequent discussion of, was this a married woman? Was it not a married woman? And in fact, not all the opinions are that she was married. It's obviously more straightforward if she was married, because then you would just say, no, it's lotinaf, it's adultery. We don't want to even take a step in that direction. But there are additional opinions from Chachamim saying, no, she wasn't married. It's such a chilul Hashem, or such a let's say, defilement of Benot Israel to allow, the daughters of Israel to be seen as promiscuous in this way. So, we would say, let him die, rather than put some ill repute on the name of her family or on the name of the daughters of Israel in general. And just it closes with, but if the woman was unmarried, then let the man marry her. And the Gemara answers, his mind would not have been eased by marriage, in accordance with a statement by Rabbi Yitzchak. As Rabbi Yitzchak says, since the temple was destroyed, sexual pleasure was taken away from those who engage in permitted intercourse and given to transgressors, as it is stated. And then there's this pasuk from Mishlei, Maim gnuvim yimteku, walechem starim yina'am. So stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Therefore, the man could have been cured only by engaging in illicit interaction. And that's how the Gemara concludes. So, in one sense, I think the main point with respect to what we've been saying about Gan Eden, which I think in a thematic sense is obviously connected to this Gemara, which concludes by talking about, eating food, and the whole thing is about sexuality, and it's about what's permitted and what's forbidden. Our sages are very concerned with, and the Torah is very concerned with, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very concerned with, the right order of thought process. Meaning, first of all, you don't start by saying, do I want this? And then, given that I want it, how do I navigate this desire towards a conclusion that will fulfill it. And then as some kind of third order thing, I should do that in the right way. I should do it in like an ethical way or whatever it is. The first question is it permitted, right? The first question is, according to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has taught us, what Moshe Rabbeinu has taught us, what our sages have taught us about how to inhabit the world, is this something that is allowed, and or is it not? And obviously, sometimes that question can be made complex, and it's not always black and white. But we should ask ourselves that question first. And if the answer is yes, and it's an easy kind of yes, then you can proceed to, okay, so do I want an apple right now or not? And if the answer is no, then trying to nonetheless make a big issue out of like, but what are we going to do about this desire is, on the one hand, the Gemara takes up the subject here, but on the other hand, it's really being quite adamant towards this fellow, right? I mean, people, especially in the present day, like to bandy about pikuach nefesh as though you can use it to cancel half the Torah whenever you want. And there are, of course, instances where pikuach nefesh, where the saving of a life does trump nearly everything, right? But the fact that the Gemara is talking in this case about a man who might be just, love struck with a woman who is not married necessarily, but it still could be the case that they would just say, look, no, you're going about this all wrong. If the way you're approaching this is, I have this desire that needs to be fulfilled or else I must die, we're not going to say, oh, it's pikuach nefesh, so let's have you talk to her through a little crack in the garden wall and call it quits. Even that, they would say, we're not going to validate, we're not going to give an inch to this way of looking at it, despite the fact that perhaps she could be, someone that he could marry, and then it wouldn't be an illicit desire, right? And I don't think the point is actually the sages are totally opposed to people ever feeling any kind of desire or attraction for people that they're going to eventually marry. But instead, it's the way that this argument is made is he's coming with his doctors and saying, first, my desire must be answered. And it's a matter of life and death. And now let that ultimatum rule the situation and determine what happens. And that when that argument is brought, the answer has to be very firm. And it's, let's start the conversation over again. No one wants this guy to die, right? But let's start the conversation over again. Let's not start with the fixity of this person's desire. Let's not start with the supremacy of the individual desire, the medical science of that desire. Let's start with what is permitted and what is not. And once we've determined that, then we can proceed to the next part of the discussion and figure out if there are different kinds of solutions, because halakha ultimately is very flexible, is very complex, is very amenable to cases where this or that part can bend and be rearranged creatively based on the judgments of poskim and people who have a sincere desire to see, on the one hand, the Torah and its commandments fulfilled and kept, and on the other hand, for people trying to keep the Torah with sincerity to do so b'simcha u'b'tuv levav, right? That they should be able to serve Hashem and rejoice about that, and to do it with a good heart. So if we make that the goal, then there's all sorts of things people might be able to come up with that aren't initially imagined as options, but we have to start the conversation that way. We can't start the conversation with the idea that desire and the need for its fulfillment comes first and sort of stands above the structure of how we guide ourselves towards making better or worse choices. And I really think we can take that all the way back to Gan Eden, and see very clearly mapped out and how we're being taught to understand this from the standpoint of the different kinds of fruits that Hashem makes for us in the world, many things that are delights to us and that are permitted to us, and he even commands us to partake of those and to enjoy them perhaps, and he also may even be content with us to try to navigate the border region where there is the possibility of our making mistakes. But if we're going to do that, we're going to do it with the recognition that he is the ultimate arbiter of what's permitted and what isn't, and that we have to study the laws he gives us to understand that issue and tread carefully.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.